The Jaguars last year in 2023, they had the AFC South well in their grasp for much of the year. But then week 10 came around. They got their butts whooped by the 49ers. They win the next game, but then they pretty much lose every game after that. A sharp decline in play, not just from their quarterback, but the rest of the team. Speaking of the quarterback, Trevor Lawrence gets hurt, and he comes back suddenly the next game. But it's clear that his injury is significantly affecting his play, and he was incurring injuries left and right in almost every game that he played. He was pretty much forcing the issue on himself. As that and a lot of other things factored into a late season collapse, and they lost the division to the Houston Texans, and they missed the playoffs entirely. Sure, they finished the season 9-8, but it's a disappointing 9-8 because you pretty much had the division wrapped up, ready to go for a playoff run, and yet you let it slip out of your hands because of this. So obviously, if you're the Jacksonville Jaguars going into this year, you want to reclaim the division, but if you can't, you still want to at least make the playoffs and try and make a run, because you at least did that in 2022 with this kind of run, this kind of record, and you almost had the Kansas City Chiefs on their heels, but you just fell a little bit short. 2023 was an absolute disappointment. So you got to make up for that this coming year. So to try and get to that goal, there were some key things that happened this past offseason, like franchise tagging and then later re-signing Josh Allen, not the quarterback, the linebacker, to this big fat contract. So they give their top linebacker Josh Allen a big fat contract, but he's been performing well, so I feel like he's earned it. They also re-signed guard Urza Cleveland to a 3-year deal. I mean, probably one of the only solid linemen on the Jaguars' shaky offensive line. And then a slew of interesting moves happened with this all-elite team. First of all, they traded for quarterback Mac Jones from the Patriots in return for this year's 6th-round pick. And I get it. New England needed to ship off their former first-round pick. You know, the same first round pick that, you know, their certain number 1 overall pick, you know, the Jaguars was drafted in. But, you know, what was the need for it? What was the need for Mac Jones? Maybe an insurance policy? I don't know. But either way, it was a kind of interesting move that these Jaguars made, acquiring Mac Jones from the Patriots. But yeah, interesting stuff there. Speaking of this draft, that 2021 draft class, they gave their quarterback Trevor Lawrence a big fat 5-year contract extension, and I'm just thinking, okay, all right. I'm just hoping that he plays up to that potential, because last year was kind of a disappointment. 2022, okay, that was his best year, and obviously rookie year is rookie year, but we'll see if he can bounce back this year. And then we can have a conversation of whether or not he's deserving of it, earned it, especially when you bring in Mac Jones for some odd reason. Then you give Trevor Lawrence the contract extension. But at least you try to give him some help when we talk about these offseason moves, because the other offseason moves that happened with Lawrence and the gang, he lost his best receiver in Calvin Ridley. He is now residing in the other side of the division with the Tennessee Titans. And I'm just like, woof. But maybe not so woof, because maybe there's been reports that he had some character issues. So maybe that's why the Jaguars let him go. Interesting that about character issues, because, well, maybe Tony Khan infected him. I don't know. Either way, they also let go Darius Williams to the Rams. So that's a choice move that the Jaguars made by letting him go. They also let Rayshawn Jenkins go to the Seahawks. So they tried to replace them all with defensive tackle Eric Armstead, who was released by the 49ers just a couple of days prior to the Jaguars signing him. More about Eric Armstead in a bit. They also got corner Ronald Darby and receiver Devin Duvernay from the Baltimore Ravens. So Duvernay being an addition to Trevor Lawrence's offense. So they also tried to replace Calvin Ridley with Gabe Davis from the Buffalo Bills. We'll see how that works. But they did upgrade their secondary a bit with Darnell Savage from the Green Bay Packers and then Mitch Morse at the offensive line for from the Bills as well. So in the draft, the Jaguars selected Brian Thomas from LSU. He's a pretty good receiver for them. And then continuing to upgrade the offensive line is Javon Foster from Missouri. And then in the trenches on the opposite side is Jordan Jefferson from LSU. So when you look at all these moves that the Jaguars made this past offseason, my thing is, why didn't they do more to upgrade the offensive line? I know there are guys like Javon Foster and Mitch Morse there, but I felt like they should have added some more people. The interior, especially last year, was a major weakness. I mean, I get it. There's a Cleveland. He has been a solid guard in his previous team, but when he came over from, I think it was the Vikings last year, he kind of disappointed. And then you had Brandon Sheriff. He's usually reliable, but the interior was kind of not good last year. It was a little lackluster. But the tackle spot wasn't any better either. Cam Robinson was solid, but he missed some time due to injury. And then Anton Harrison struggled in his rookie year. Maybe he'll bounce back. But yeah, that's pretty much the theme. There's at least room for improvement going into this season for all involved. But it's a little surprising that Trent Baalke didn't beef up the offensive line, because Trevor Lawrence's protection, or the lack thereof, that's where the injuries piled up for him last season. I'm not sure why Trent Baalke wants a repeat of that. And then on the other side of the ball, the defense, at least before this critical move, I thought it was going to be better. Maybe it still could be better, but the Jaguars defense really struggled last year in both the pass rush and the secondary. The secondary should at least be a little bit better with their additions with Darnell Savage and maybe Ronald Darby if he could stay healthy, but we will see. But the pass rush, I thought was going to be better to try and help out Trayvon Walker and Josh Allen, and the linebacker, not the quarterback. But the news came out a couple of days ago that their defensive tackle, the one that I mentioned, Eric Armstead, yeah, he got put on the physically unable to perform list right before training camp. Yeah, that's not good for them. It's like, for as productive as Armstead was for the 49ers, my team, there's a reason why the Niners released him, because, for as productive as he was in the interior, especially on the run, like with run defense, and then, sometimes he'll get to the quarterback as well. You just can't stay healthy. So it's clear that Trayvon Walker and Josh Allen are once again going to have to carry the load for this front seven. But at least the receiver, and on a positive note, the receiver position should be a little bit more stacked. Especially now that Calvin Ridley is gone from the Titans, Christian Kirk certainly was gonna needed some help. Had they not gotten the likes of Gabe Davis and then drafted Brian Thomas, so at least now he has some help that can help out Trevor Lawrence. So looking at some of the Jaguars' key games for this coming season, boy, they start with the gauntlet. The first month of the season is brutal for them. You go to Miami to take on Tua and the Dolphins. Then you host Deshaun Watson and the Cleveland Browns in your home opener. Then you get a 2-week road trip. You're going back on the road, starting up Western New York to take on Josh Allen, the Bills. And then your first division game of the season against CJ Stroud and the Houston Texans in week 4. Yeah, these are games that the Jaguars absolutely have to win right out of the gate. And if they don't, they're screwed. So, with Trevor Lawrence, we know how good or bad, depending on your perception of him, we know how he can be. But my biggest criticism, my biggest critique of Trevor Lawrence is his turnovers. He can be a little turnover prone sometimes. Last year, he was more of that, which I'm not sure. Maybe it was with the injuries, but it was even before that. He was pretty turnover prone, which dug the Jaguars into these holes and eventually the losses that they suffered prior to Trevor Lawrence getting hurt. So hopefully, this past offseason, Lawrence was working on cutting back on this turnovers with this coaching staff, and hopefully he's going to protect the football more and just generally making better decisions with it. So the Jaguars, they majorly disappointed in 2023, and now that you have the Colts, especially the Texans, improving their rosters more than they have, it's going to be a challenge for them to try and compete in this division. But hey, what better way to try and make yourselves better than to compete with your division rivals? So speaking of compete, they'll still be in contention for the division. I mean, it's just going to be harder. They'll also still be in contention for a playoff spot because why not? It's the AFC. But they have several tough games, and that starts at the beginning of the season. So if a fully healthy Trevor Lawrence doesn't bounce back, then, well, it's going to be another disappointment in the land of all elite of Duval County.